And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection, your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. The oil and gas industry is a significant part of Canada's economy, contributing to the GDP, providing jobs and generating revenue for the governments. In 2022, the industry contributed $71.4 billion to Canada's GDP. We begin today's Open Connection with nation-to-nation panel discussion, Energizing the Economy.
Energy is foundational to our society. It affects everything. Whether you use wood heat to heat your home, natural gas to cook your food, electricity to take a shower, it doesn't matter. In fact, the standard of living that we enjoy here in Canada can be traced back to energy. 3/4 of the world who live in energy poverty would love to live the way we live. But we're coming up against issues now, especially in the first world, like Canada. And I'm very honored and privileged to actually host a panel discussion like this because I've been actually looking into energy for the last 20 years. It started with LNG, but as you'll find out, energy branches off into everything else, especially in today's political world. So I'm gonna give the mic over to each of these panelist members here and give them 5 to 10 minutes each to talk about who they are and what they're doing here and what their interest is in energy. Mr. Barry Penner.
Thank you, Ellis. I'll try to be even briefer than that. My name is Barry Penner, as you might have gathered. I am a recovering politician like Ellis, former MLA, but I lasted 16 years, Ellis. But of course, he's not completely done yet, is he? He's still aspiring to other forms of elected office. But I saw the writing on the wall for myself, and after 4 terms, decided that was enough. I represented the riding in the Fraser Valley, Chilliwack. At times it was called Chilliwack Hope, and then Chilliwack Kent. I didn't move, but my riding boundaries did. And it was an interesting time, a great experience for me, great learning opportunity. And one of the things I got very interested in was energy. And along the way, I became our Minister of Environment in British Columbia and worked to deliver our first climate action plan in British Columbia at the same time that the carbon tax was introduced. So I was intimately involved in all of those discussions and planning and took a keen interest in our energy system in the province. And now, after leaving office, after my first daughter was born, I now have 2 kids. They're now 9 and soon to be 14 years of age. And I'm in private practice, but I'm still interested in the same things I was all along, which is energy and our environment, and how do we make British Columbia continue to be a great place to live, and how do we sustain ourselves. So in that regard, I'm now leading what's called the Energy Futures Institute. It's an offshoot of ResourceWorks, which was founded by this man that you'll hear from in a moment. Some of you have already met him, I'm sure, Stuart Muir. And we launched about a year ago, trying to take another perspective, offer more public commentary on our energy options and the implications in British Columbia, because there's a perspective that we simply weren't really hearing publicly about what is realistic, what is achievable. It's one thing to have ambitions, it's another thing to actually see if they're feasible and what it would take to accomplish them.
We started ResourceWorks 10 years ago. There was a slate of projects actually that we were thinking about a lot. Almost all of them had much to do with where we stand here. And this region in the northwest of British Columbia is the most economically significant part of Canada. I would even say in the long haul of North America. It's a corridor of potential for the movement of goods. It has been that for time immemorial, as I've been learning coming here for 8 years because of what Lisa Mueller has created with this gathering, and so much of what I've learned in the ways of Indigenous British Columbia, of the First Nations rootedness in the land, has been from this nation-to-nation gathering. So I'm very grateful to what it has meant in my journey of understanding in energy, not just as a set of molecules or electrons, but as a cultural and economic and social phenomenon, because it really is the thing that drives everything. And when I think about, say, the economy, I'm also thinking, and I would suggest you think, of just substituting another word, energy.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. Energy is fundamentally linked to economic activity. Energy is essential for production, consumption, and overall economic growth, while economic development drives increased energy demand. This relationship is complex, with factors like energy efficiency and access playing a critical role on how energy and economic growth interact. Let us rejoin the conversation with Stuart.
Because in almost every case, you could exchange the word economy for the word energy, and you'd be talking about the same thing, because all human endeavors are actions that require energy or produce energy. It's also true that many of the things that are the economy and energy have another E word, emissions, and that's obviously a big issue. I tweeted yesterday, SJ Muir is my Twitter account, from the Bloomberg News Service, which is one of the more reputable, one of the top financial news wires in the world. They had a chart, a very simple chart, global emissions. It said we've reached peak emissions in 2024. You've probably heard of peak oil. You probably heard in the 1960s that it was predicted peak oil had arrived. It was wrong. It was predicted again a few years ago that peak oil had arrived. That was wrong. Peak oil is probably not around the corner, but peak emissions apparently are here. And that's because of something that's happening in Canada, the more efficient use. So there's another E for you to add to this, because I think it's the most important thing. And I was talking yesterday in Vancouver with a senior vice president of Cenovus, which is one of the most, I think, significant of the Canadian energy companies. It goes back to the very roots of the country, to the Canadian Pacific Railroad, and its origins lie in that. But he was saying that, yeah, they are becoming more efficient in producing energy, and that's why emissions are coming down, because innovation after innovation is allowing that to happen. And so just to come back and finish this, because it's really just a setup, is I think that progress is possible, that emissions can, will, and are coming down, which is what we need to happen. And that the idea that we're, say, exiting from having energy, which means to me having an economy, which I don't think is politically a saleable idea in Canada, we needn't be so fatalistic about this when we can be innovating, reducing emissions, having the energy, being in a place that is probably the most significant in a geopolitical sense in Canada, this place here, right here. It's an incredibly important role, and the influence of the work you're doing by being here is not what happens in the room. It's what you're going to take back to your roles, your communities, your governments, your companies, to do that. And I think being influencers in that is really, really important. And I couldn't think of a better place that Lisa Mueller has created to be doing this work. And it is important work that's brought us here. So thanks.
So I've been in MLA for 7 years, and I was energy critic, which means I'm the one that's supposed to criticize the government on their energy regulations and laws. I was also an environment critic for a while because of my background in environmental assessments and Aboriginal rights and title. If you're anything like me, you are trying to make sense of all the news coming out of the energy. It's hard, it's tough. There's so many different forms of energy, so many different opinions, so many different technologies, so much politics. It's hard to figure out where the truth lies and where's our future, not only here in BC, but globally. This is a question that's being asked all around the world right now as we speak, and not for the same reasons. I'm sure every single one of you want to see emissions reduced. Not everybody thinks like that around the world. So I'm really glad that I'm going to sit down in a non-political sense and have these two gentlemen try to explain to us the reality of energy.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. While often used interchangeably, renewable and clean are not synonymous. Renewable energy sources are naturally replenished, while they may not always be clean, and some clean energy sources like nuclear are not renewable. Let us return to the conversation as Barry shares what kind of electricity British Columbia imported in 2024.
BC Hydro imported, we thought, about 20% of our electricity needs. That's what BC Hydro had told us last year, but in fact, according to their annual report that's just been released, it was actually closer to 25%. So about 1/4 of our electricity requirements last year came from outside the province, the majority from the United States. And in the US today, 60% of all their electricity comes from fossil fuel, whether it's natural gas or coal. And the remainder of our imports came from Alberta. So that's where the imported electricity has been coming from. Alberta, about 70% of their electricity generation comes from natural gas. They just decommissioned their last remaining coal-fired plant this summer. It was shuttered. So now it's natural gas, wind, and solar power, and some small amount of hydroelectricity in Alberta. But the majority, 70%, is natural gas.
Barry, just to follow up on this, a previous government said we need Site C. Through all the politics to get Site C built. Next government comes in, says we don't need Site C, but later on commits to building Site C, and then says we need more power than Site C can deliver, so we got to go to clean energy, a call for clean energy. How is that all going to fit in with this mandate for EVs and the idea to electrify BC?
Well, somebody had a reversal on the road to Damascus. I think is what you're referring to, yes. The critics said that the electricity from Site C would not be needed. That's the new dam in the Peace River that's still under construction. It was first announced in 2010. So 14 years ago, former Premier Gordon Campbell announced that the province would go ahead and build that project. We had to go through environmental assessments and many court challenges, and then the government changed, as Ellis points out, and the current government got elected partly on a promise to stop the Site C dam, saying it wasn't required, but conducted a review after they got elected and decided to continue construction of that dam. When it's completed, and the first turbine is supposed to start spinning by December, but there's going to be a total of 6 turbines in that dam. The last one won't be finished for another year. So the first one comes on in December, the last one maybe December 2025, so it's still not finished. Cost now is up to about $16 billion and counting. It'll add about 8% to our total electricity supplies in an average water year in BC. Of course, the last few years have not been average, so it's been a drought. But if we had that dam already operating, we would still be importing electricity because although it would add 8%, as I mentioned, we've imported actually about 25% in the last year, and we've continued to import electricity this year. The most recent stats are we've imported about almost 2 Site C dams worth of electricity so far this year. That's where we're at on that.
Okay, a related topic. Before we get into a different report later on that was put out by BCBC, I want to stay on this topic for a while because we're really talking about the reality of energy. And I want to read a definition of the word dilemma. Dilemma, a situation in which a difficult choice has to be made between 2 or more alternatives, especially equally undesirable ones. That's where we're at in terms of energy. But I think Stuart has got a different word that he'd like to define in trying to explain where we're going with our energy future.
A different word than dilemma. Trilemma. 3. Not necessarily unpleasant things, but necessary things. Trilemma, as an energy trilemma, is actually an idea that has started to be talked about in the last couple of years, and I took a look at it. I thought, that's a really good construct for what I'm seeing. So I want to tell you what the energy trilemma is. It's the idea that there are 3 conditions that apply to how we get and use energy. One is that we require the energy we use to be affordable, because otherwise, we can't get it. We require it to be there when we need it, so reliable. And we also require, increasingly so, that it be sustainable or green. All of those three things. Now, you might have at some point, especially if you're, say, a homeowner, had a tradesperson come to your house, maybe a plumber looking at the job, and the plumber, if they're a plumber with a funny bone, might say, well, what kind of job would you like? Do you want it fast, cheap, or good? You can have two of those three things, only two. And you know how that goes. You can have fast and cheap. You can have, but with the trilemma, as a society, we're demanding all three. It's got to be reliable, affordable, and green. So how do you get there? That's really, I think, the essential question of the moment we're in.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
A kilowatt is 1,000 watts. A megawatt is 1,000 kilowatts. A gigawatt is 1,000 megawatts. A terawatt is 1,000 gigawatts. A terawatt hour is a unit of energy equal to 1 trillion watt hours. In this final segment of Open Connection, let us rejoin the conversation as Barry shares some challenges facing the electric vehicle market.
Back to Barry, especially in terms of this electrifying BC, I was very simplistic in my thinking, saying that the urban centers are the biggest polluters around the world in terms of their buildings, in terms of their traffic. So it makes sense for the urban centers, the big cities, to transition to an electrified future, but it doesn't make sense for us. We can't be biking around on electric bikes in November up here. It's just too cold. But there are more questions about electrifying a very dense population in a place like Vancouver or Coquitlam or any other place like that. What are those problems in terms of, say, developing an apartment complex or a condominium as opposed to, say, a detached house?
Good question. So the challenges come in layers. So in that news article you saw, we talked about really the primary focus was, generating enough electricity. And the thought of, 2 more Site C dams worth of electricity just to move vehicles is a daunting challenge. But that one's probably less challenging than how you get those electrons once they're generated through the transmission lines. New ones would have to be built, and then into neighborhoods, subdivisions, and apartment blocks all across the province. Typically, people hear about electric vehicles, they imagine plugging in at home in a single detached garage, kind of 1950s style. But many people in urban settings live in apartment buildings, and they don't have their own garage, it's a shared space. And many of those buildings were built, they're already built. And so they were built to meet the needs of that time, which did not include up to several hundred residents plugging in electric vehicles all at the same time, and that demand. So existing apartment buildings, up to 40% of people in the Lower Mainland live in multi-family dwellings. How are you going to upgrade the electrical infrastructure in 40 or 50-year-old apartment buildings with a lot of money and time and skilled labor that's in short supply already? So the challenges multiply when you get to thinking about scale. So we've got a certain number of people have already adopted and got electric vehicles, and they're using the existing system, and it's working for them. But if we're going to meet the BC mandate, which is the surprising one, 90% by 2030 model year, there is a slight difference between year and model year, because those models come out 6 months before the year starts typically. Like right about now, if you go on a dealer's lot, they're starting to get the 2025s. They're kind of trying to get rid of the 2024s. Well, that means in 2029, this time, there will be the law in BC that you have to have 90% electric vehicle sales. And that penalty that Ellis referred to, the $20,000 hit, that's coming to you in 5 years from now. Actually sooner, because there's also another mandate of 26% by 2026 model year, which will be a year from now. meaning that if the dealers are not selling 26% electric vehicles starting next year this time, any internal combustion vehicles that exceed the allowed limit get slapped with a $20,000 penalty. And that's coming to you in 12 months from now. So the auto dealers are holding a news conference today in Vancouver. It will be on the news tonight. And they're saying that what they will do is they will start withholding vehicles from British Columbia. We're going to have vehicle rationing and choice being rationed. So I want to be clear. I actually love the electric technology. I drive a mostly electrified vehicle. It's a plug-in hybrid, has both a gas engine and a battery. So most of my daily driving I do entirely on electricity. But I resent the idea that the government is forcing people with a threat of a $20,000 fine to have to adopt this electricity solution, this particular technology for the transportation choice. They're taking that choice away from you effectively before we even have the infrastructure built up to support it. And my worry really is multiple, but one of them is it's politicizing the issue. There are people now that say, I don't like electric vehicles because the government's trying to make me drive one, and I don't like being told what to do. It's kind of a human emotion. Most of us kind of resent being told what to do. That started early on as a kid when your father or mother tells you what you have to do, or your teacher. Some of us kind of resisted that, speaking for myself. So anyway, that's one of the things that is the unintended consequence. You're seeing a backlash. Polling out today shows that up to 40% of British Columbians have absolutely no intention of ever buying an electric vehicle. And so how are we going to get to 90% in just 4 or 5 years from now in terms of the sales targets? It's not targets, sorry, requirements. Anyway, I could go on too long, so I'll stop there. But the technology itself works for many applications, but not all. And to Alice's point, it probably has more challenges in more remote communities than in urban centers. But even in the urban centers, the question is, where will these people plug in when they're living in a condominium that's already been built but wasn't built to deliver this volume of electricity to that number of people all at the same time? And the TV report mentioned up to 100,000 or 90,000 public charging stations required just in Metro Vancouver by 2040 to support that number of EVs on the road. So let me just paint one more picture. I know I said I was going to stop, but I think this is important, again, to get this idea through. Because again, many politicians, when they talk about it, they're happy to create this image of someone safely parking in their garage at home. But if you're in an apartment building and it's not possible, or the Strata Council doesn't want to pay for the millions of dollars of upgrade to their building to allow you to plug in your underground garage, where will you charge your vehicle at night? Well, you're expected then to go down the road, maybe a few blocks in downtown Vancouver and Burnaby or somewhere, and plug in and leave your vehicle outside overnight while you go back home, carrying your groceries after work in the rain, as it sometimes happens in the Lower Mainland, like here.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.